Hello, in this video I'm going to get the car explosion put together. So when there's a collision, we're going to switch out the car with another object, and that other object is going to have four little parts that are kind of moving in different directions. The code that moves these objects in different directions and eventually destroys the collision object is already created for you. It's in the PDF. You can just create a new script, create C# script, and paste it in from the PDF, or you can just import them. So let me go import my scripts. I will say import new asset. And notice I'm in my scripts folder here. You want to, this is the, the way you keep your project organized. Import new asset, and then let me go into my scripts folder, which for me is going to be documents. Oh, this is so frustrating. Teaching, Unity, donkey, scripts. There we go. I'm just going to grab all my scripts and say import. And there are my scripts. All right. So now that we've got these scripts, we can get into the details of building our little exploding car. What we're going to do here is take the sprite that we already have for the car and chop it up into 4 pieces. But we're not going to do that with the sprite we already have. We're going to clone this thing. And if you kind of go through the options here, you'll see there's no option to duplicate this or make a copy. But if you hit Control D with an object selected, it will make a copy of it. So now we have race car 1. And now we can go modify this thing, and it'll, it's not going to affect the first thing. So let's chop this up into 4 pieces, which means we'll set its sprite mode to be multiple. And then let's open up the sprite editor. And I'll click apply. And let's go back up to the slice thing at the top left. And instead of saying automatic, let's go by cell count. So we'll say how many cells across and how many cells down we want. So I'll select cell count. And for C, for the number of columns, I'll put in 2. For the number of rows, I'll put in 2. And for the pivot, I guess I'll just leave it set as center and then say slice. And you can see now we've got this thing cut into 4 pieces. I was really hoping there was a way we could assign each one of these sprites a unique center so we could all have them kind of seamlessly meet at the middle, but it turns out that you can't do that. And now that I've got my image sliced into 4 pieces, I'll close this and I'll say apply. So now you'll see if I expand the race car 1, it's got 4 pieces. All right. Now, how do we turn this thing into an explosion? Well, let's kind of put the car back together here in our scene. So let me over here, let me drag in the pieces of the car. They don't have to be exact. Oops. Pretty close is good enough. And then so we're trying to kind of put our car back together. There we go. Certainly good enough. Okay, and now that we've got each one of these pieces here in our scene, we're going to give them all a common parent. So let's create a new, let's create an empty object here. Create an empty object, and I'm going to call it crash. And notice the crash is way over here. What I want to do is put the crash in the middle of the car. The middle of the car. And then let's take all of these pieces of the car, and I hit Control, click, and I'm going to drag them onto crash here. So watch what happens when I let go of the mouse. They are all now a child of the crash, right? So now if I can kind of toggle the whole thing off. I've kind of grouped these whole things into one unit. So now I've got a crash object contains these 4 children, these 4 child objects. Now, let's go back to those scripts. We've got a script called car piece, which is going to tell each piece to move in a different direction. So the top right piece will move to the top right. The top left piece will move to the top up and left. So all the 4 pieces will fly apart. And we also have another script that we're going to put on the crash thing that is going to make the whole thing get destroyed after about a second. So if we're going to put a script on the kind of a timeout script or a self-destruct script on the crash, so the pieces fly apart, but then the whole thing kind of goes away. So let's take the car piece script, and what we're going to do is drag it onto each one of these objects. So watch this. I can just drag and drop a script right onto an object. There we go. So let's look at race car. So now each one of these pieces of the car has this car piece script component on it over here. And notice that they have public variables for the X sign and the Y sign. This is whether they move up, down, left, or right. So right, if the X sign is positive, it'll move to the right. If the X sign is negative, it'll move to the left. Same thing with the Y. Or the Y may be backwards. We'll figure it out. So so for this piece, race car 10, that's the upper left. Let's say that its X sign is negative, and let's say that its Y sign is, let's say, positive. I think Y-axis is flipped in the 2D world. And then race car 11, which is the top right, let's say that its X sign is positive because we want it to move to the right, and we want its Y sign to be positive because we want it to move up. And then let's go to the bottom, looks like the bottom left piece of the car here. Let's set its X sign to be -1 and its Y sign to be positive for moving down. I think that's, no, negative for moving down because I think it's backwards and in Unity. And then for the bottom right piece of the car, we want its X sign to be positive and its Y sign to be negative. So I think, so now when this thing is created, each piece will start moving in a different direction. And then lastly, let's put the crash script on the very top level here. So there's the crash script. I can either just drag it onto the object here, or I can just drag it and drop it onto a blank area over here. And you can see there's the crash script. And if you open these scripts up, you'll see that the crash script just says, when it starts up, it says, call a function in 1 second that destroys me. So that's how that's going to work. Now that we've got this object in our scene, let's just run the game. Let's just run what we've gotten and see what it does. So I'm going to take the crash. I want to make sure that the crash is selected because now, see, I can move all of these pieces as one unit. And let's put it, where the car is. And run it. Right, and you can see the pieces fly apart. That's kind of fun. So we got it right. Now let's take this crash that we have. What we want to do is turn this into an object that we can clone, that we can say whenever we need it, we want to create it, kind of like a rocket or an explosion. I mean, it is an explosion, but you don't just, you don't have these objects all in the scene when the game starts. You need to create them on demand. So how do you create an object on demand? That's called a prefab. So what I'm going to do in my assets folder is I'm going to make another folder here, create a folder. I'm going to call it prefabs. And this is going to be where I put clonable things, right? So this is going to be the only clonable thing in this game, but other games are going to have lots and lots of prefabs: smoke trails, rockets, sparks, enemies that spawn, anything that spawns is a prefab. So let's go into the prefabs folder here, and now to make this thing a prefab, all I have to do is take it and drag it down here into the prefabs folder, and it has now been bundled up. This thing is now a prefab. And in fact, I can actually delete it out of the scene. I don't need it anymore because I've got it here as a prefab. Now watch this. If I want more of these things, watch, I'll just drag them in. See, prefabricated objects. There we go. Okay. So now I don't really need all those, right? So let me delete them out. But now the important thing is we've created this object that we can kind of clone out whenever we need it. So in the next video, what we'll do is take a look at making a controller that's actually going to do the collision detection and get the cows moving and make the road pieces move. We'll get this whole thing kind of tied together, and the controller is the glue that does that. The controller is the coordinator of the game, and it's it will kind of be we'll kind of wire all of our pieces up to it, and then we'll be able to play our game. So the next video will probably I think we're going to start working on the controller here.